My name is Néstor Wagner. I'm the director of the Southern California School of Interpretation and SCSI Testing. I have over 30 years experience training and testing interpreters, particularly interpreters working in the criminal, civil, and immigration courts, as well as conference interpreters. During this last year, I have received numerous emails from former students of mine who are now working in the courts as interpreters, from judges, from the courts, and from non-profit organizations, asking my opinion on the effectiveness of using VRI in the courtroom. Specifically, they wanted to know my opinion on the use of the WebEx platform. In order to provide an opinion that is based on facts, I decided to write a paper which you are invited to download by clicking on the upper right-hand corner of the screen. The name of the paper is Effects on Accuracy in the Rendition of a Source Message into the Target Language using onsite versus VRI protocols, specifically using the WebEx platform for the VRI protocol. We had a sample of 22 Spanish language interpreters. Although the sample is rather low, this sample provided results that are worthwhile publishing. The interpreters were asked to interpret using two protocols, the onsite protocol and the VRI protocol. The onsite protocol is the protocol that it is used. It's the traditional protocol that it is used when all the parties are in the courtroom. The VRI protocol is the protocol used when either the interpreter is not in the courtroom or the respondent is not in the courtroom or any of the parties is not in the courtroom. The interpreters were asked to do that for two cases, for two scenarios. First, interpret for witness, where the non-English speaker is active in the interaction because the non-English speaker is answering questions. And then for non-witness testimony, where the non-English speaker is passive in the interaction because the non-English speaker is just listening to what is being said in the courtroom. Or maybe the non-English speaker is listening to a court order or sentencing or a statement of law or whatever the case is, but the non-English speaker is really not involved in that interaction. Now, the results of these two scenarios are as follows. When the interpreter the interpreters rather, were asked to interpret using both protocols, onsite and VRI, for witness testimony, the accuracy in the delivery of the message was approximately 90%, a little bit over 90% for the onsite protocol, and slightly about around 90% for the VRI protocol. Definitely, there is no substantial difference between these protocols. So one could reasonably conclude that using the onsite protocol and using the VRI protocol, when the interpreter is asked to interpret witness testimony using the consecutive mode, will not result in a major difference in terms of accuracy. The results for the non-witness testimony scenario is quite different. In the onsite protocol, the accuracy was about 90%. Now, I have to explain to you that the onsite protocol for non-witness testimony, for any type of part of the hearing where there is no testimony, for example, for court orders, for sentencing, for when the judge reads the statement of law, when the judge is talking to the attorneys, in a traditional setting, that is the onsite protocol, the interpreter uses the simultaneous mode because that's precisely why the simultaneous mode is applied in interpreting legal proceedings, because the interpreter can now acquire the information and at the same time interpret that information for the benefit of the defendant or the respondent. When you use the VRI protocol, when they use the VRI protocol, the interpreters were unable to use the simultaneous mode. And that's because the WebEx platform has a limitation on using the simultaneous mode. It is possible for the host of that meeting to play with volume controls to be able to allow the interpreter to use the simultaneous mode, but it is certainly not user-friendly. So the accuracy for VRI, where the interpreter had to use the consecutive mode, was a little bit over 60%. This is a substantial difference between the onsite protocol and the VRI protocol. And the question, of course, is why? Well, if you read my paper, there are many opinions that are based on my personal experience and also on the feedback provided by the interpreters who do this on a daily basis. The main reason is that interpreters are really not trained to interpret legal convoluted structures using the consecutive mode. Because interpreters, when they use the consecutive mode of interpretation, they rely on three elements, on three tools, we call them: visualization technique, short-term memory, and note-taking. When the original is very abstract, such as in the case of, let's say, a court order or statement of the law, or when the judge sentences the defendant, it is very difficult for the interpreter to use the visualization technique. You cannot visualize abstract concepts as easily as you would visualize something that you're more familiar with, that is more tangible to you. So of those three elements, or those three tools that the interpreter has at his or her disposal when using the consecutive mode, one is completely eliminated. Note-taking is also a problem when the original includes convoluted legal structures. And that's because it's very hard to write down the whole term at the speed at which the judge generally is pronouncing, sentencing, or it's giving a court order. So it leaves the interpreter only with the short-term memory, which it's quite difficult for the interpreter to recall these legal structures unless the interpreter sees these structures on a daily basis. And although the court is very familiar with these structures, the interpreters are not as familiar as the court is. And as a result of it, you may get interpreters in your courtroom who might be better than others because they may have more experience. But keep in mind that regardless of how good the interpreter is, because of the interpreter's experience hearing these structures, the level of accuracy is always going to be very low. This means that the defendant or the respondent is not really capturing everything that is being said because the interpreter is unable to render the message accurately. You can say, based on on this chart, for example, that the interpreter was able to interpret only 60% of the original. Therefore, the defendant or the respondent was able to understand only 60% of the original. So this basically is my personal opinion, but it is based on data, on an experiment, if we could call it an experiment, that actually called for a comparison between onsite and VRI protocols. Now, another way to understand why it is difficult for the interpreter to render these legal convoluted structures, and one way to do that is for you to experience it. So I have prepared kind of three practices where I ask you to, I will read something to you, and I ask you, after I finish reading it, to basically say it again in English. You don't have to even interpret. Remember, in the case of the interpreter, The interpreter has to first capture the message and then interpret. In your case, you're gonna do only 50% of the task. You're gonna hear the original, and then you're gonna try to deliver the original in the same language, repeat it in the same language. We have 3 different practices. They're very short, one in criminal, one in civil, and one in immigration courts. And although you as a judge or as an attorney, you might be able to remember all of this because of how familiar you are with this content, keep in mind that the interpreter, in your courtroom, you may get interpreters with different level of experience. And if you have an interpreter on a given day who has been interpreting for only 1 year, that person is unable to know or to be so familiar with these legal structures in order to transfer them accurately. So let's see how that goes. I'm going to read something to you, and all I ask you to do is that at the end, when I pause, that you repeat that in the same language. Okay, so here we go. The grand jury has charged that on or about September 10, 2021, at Jacksonville, Florida, the defendant, by force, violence, and intimidation, took from Maria Ramirez Lima, a bank teller, approximately $50,450 in money belonging to the First City Bank of Jacksonville, Florida. Please now repeat it in the same language. Well, the original is this is the first paragraph, and you can see that some of the difficulties happen to be, most likely you may or may have not remembered the date, the amounts, the places. This is all factual information, very difficult to remember. And although it doesn't have a lot of legal terms, still it's convoluted enough for the interpreter not to be able to deliver it with a high degree of accuracy. We're going to try a second one, and this time is going to be in the civil jurisdiction. So let's see if you can remember this one. All right, so here we go. The collision was caused by the recklessness, carelessness, and negligence of the defendant, James C. Sexton, for that, among other acts and omissions, the defendant, A, operated the motor vehicle at a high, dangerous, and excessive rate of speed under the circumstances then and there existing. B, failed to reduce speed to avoid a collision. Please repeat it in the same language now. The original is now on the screen. And this one is certainly very convoluted. And it has some factual information, such as the name of the defendant. But everything else is pretty much very legal. These are legal structures and phrases that are formatted in a certain way that it's very difficult to recall it by using short-term memory unless you are very familiar with this. So we're going to do the last one, and this one will be for immigration court. And this is going to be something that most likely immigration judges use on a daily basis. So one would expect the immigration judge to recall it, most of this without any major problems. But keep in mind that the interpreter is not trained in the legal field and is not as familiar with these legal structures as you, as the judge, is. Okay? So let's see how you do the immigration exercise. Here we go. If you do not comply with the terms of this order, and the advisal given at this hearing, the grant of voluntary departure will automatically terminate, and the alternate order of removal shall take effect immediately, and you shall be removed to Mexico. You shall further be ineligible for a period of 10 years to receive any further relief of voluntary departure, cancellation of removal, adjustment of status, register and change of non-immigrant classification. Please repeat it in the same language. Now you can see on the screen the original. And this one is very convoluted, a very difficult segment. So if you are an immigration judge, it's very possible that you were able to deliver most of this. But if you are a criminal judge, it's very unlikely that you remember all this. And by the same token, if you are an immigration judge, you probably had difficulties with this, which is the civil one, or maybe even the criminal one, unless you're also a criminal judge. So what I'm trying to say here is that if you know this material well enough, it's possible to render a rather acceptable, it's possible to provide a rather acceptable accuracy in the rendition. But we should always keep in mind that the interpreter is not exposed to this type of material as often as judges are. Okay, so with this, I'm finished this video. And if you would like to contact me, you are more than welcome to do so. My email is included on the right below the heading of the paper that you downloaded. Thank you very much.